The subway station was alive with its usual chaos: clattering footsteps, hurried conversations, screeching brakes of arriving trains, and the cold metallic echo that lingered in the air. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on tired commuters who rushed past, each person absorbed in their own world, their own urgency, their own silent struggles. It was a place where people passed by one another without acknowledgement, where kindness rarely paused to take root, where the rhythm of survival drowned out the softer notes of humanity. Amid this restless tide of humanity sat a young woman named Clara. She carried a backpack, wore a dark coat zipped up against the underground chill, and held a simple plate of food with one hand while a bottle of water rested in the other. She wasn't in a hurry like everyone else, she wasn't dashing for a train or looking at her phone. Instead, she had stopped in the middle of the station. Because in front of her, sitting against the cold tiles of the wall, was another woman, Maria, holding a small child in her lap. Maria's face was pale with exhaustion, her hair loosely tied, strands falling over her forehead. Her jacket, though zipped, looked worn and too thin to ward off the biting air. Her jeans were faded, her shoes frayed at the edges. Yet it wasn't her own discomfort that weighed most heavily, it was the child in her arms. The little boy, no older than 2, clung to her tightly, his eyes heavy with hunger and fatigue. Maria stroked his back with one hand while trying to conceal the gnawing emptiness in her own stomach. Clara had seen them before, sitting there in the same spot, day after day. Sometimes, she had walked past, just like everyone else. She had told herself the same things that most people whispered internally: someone else will help. Maybe they're not really in need. Maybe I shouldn't get involved. Those thoughts had been easy excuses, ways to protect her own comfort. But that evening, something shifted inside her. Maybe it was the way the little boy looked up with quiet, expectant eyes. Maybe it was the way Maria tried to smile, tried to be strong, while clearly falling apart inside. Clara had bought a modest meal for herself before entering the station: some bread, roasted chicken pieces, and a bottle of water. It wasn't much, but as she crouched down and met Maria's eyes, she realized it was more than the young mother and her child had at that moment. I don't know if this is enough," Clara said softly, her voice hesitant, almost apologetic. "But please, take it. You both need it more than I do." Maria's lips parted, her eyes widening as she saw the plate of food and the bottle of water. For a moment, she hesitated. Pride and desperation fought within her. She didn't want to appear as though she was begging, and yet she couldn't ignore the hollow ache in her son's stomach. She glanced at the boy, whose little hand reached instinctively toward the food. "Are you sure?" Maria whispered, her voice trembling. Clara nodded firmly, holding out the plate. "Yes. I want you to have it." As she extended the plate, however, something unexpected happened. A small slip of her hand, perhaps from the hurriedness of the moment or the tremble of nervousness, caused part of the bread and chicken to fall onto the cold station floor. The pieces scattered on the dirty tiles, tainted by the grime of countless footsteps. Clara froze, her heart sinking. She had wanted to give generously, but now half of it lay ruined. Maria looked down at the fallen food. For a moment, an uncomfortable silence hung in the air. People passed by, barely noticing, but to Clara, it felt as though the entire station had turned to watch her failure. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo what had just happened. But before she could speak, Maria looked up and gave her a small, weary smile. "Thank you," Maria said softly, her voice steady despite everything. "Even this, even what's left, means so much. You don't know how much." Clara's throat tightened. She carefully handed over the portion that had not fallen, along with the bottle of water. Maria accepted it with both hands, as though holding something precious, and immediately tore off a piece of bread to give to her son. The boy reached eagerly, chewing quickly, crumbs tumbling down his chin. His little eyes lit up with relief, as if this simple bite of food was the greatest treasure he had ever known. Clara watched, her own stomach growling faintly, but she felt no regret. Instead, she felt something deeper: an ache, yes, but one mixed with gratitude. Gratitude that she had stopped. Gratitude that she could share, even imperfectly. Gratitude that in this cold, rushing world, two strangers could meet in kindness. Yet the story did not end there. That simple act of offering food became the beginning of something far greater than Clara had imagined. For in the days that followed, she could not stop thinking about Maria and her child. Every time Clara returned to the subway station, she looked for them. Sometimes she saw them, sometimes she didn't. But each time she did, she brought something: an extra sandwich, a warm coffee, a blanket she no longer used. At first, Maria accepted shyly, always murmuring thanks, always trying to give back in small ways. Once, she gave Clara a folded paper flower her son had scribbled on with crayons they had found discarded nearby. Another time, she whispered a prayer for Clara's health, her voice trembling with sincerity. The kindness passed between them like a thread, weaving a fragile but undeniable bond. Weeks turned into months, and Clara learned more of Maria's story. Maria had once worked as a receptionist, lived in a small apartment with her husband. But tragedy had unraveled her life. Her husband had fallen gravely ill, the medical bills had drained their savings, and after his passing, Maria had lost her job. With no family nearby and no steady income, she had spiraled into homelessness, struggling to care for her little boy with whatever scraps she could find. Clara listened, her heart heavy. She realized how easy it was to judge when passing by a stranger sitting on the ground, yet how little people truly knew of the storms others carried. But kindness has a way of multiplying, of spreading beyond its first spark. One evening, as Clara once again crouched down to share a meal with Maria, another commuter stopped. He was a middle-aged man in a business suit, briefcase in hand, clearly on his way home. He had passed by countless times before, never looking twice. But this time, he paused. He watched as Clara gently handed Maria a warm meal and smiled at the boy. Something in the scene stirred him. "Here," the man said gruffly, reaching into his wallet. He handed Maria a folded bill. "Get yourself something decent." Maria's eyes widened, tears pooling. She whispered thanks, clutching the money with trembling hands. The man nodded, awkwardly clearing his throat, before walking on. The next day, another commuter stopped. And then another. Some gave food, some gave money, some gave warm clothes. It was as though Clara's simple act had cracked open a door, reminding people of their own humanity. The once invisible mother and child became known, not as nameless strangers on the station floor, but as Maria and her son Daniel. Commuters began to greet them, smile at them, ask if they were okay. Slowly, the tide began to shift. One woman, moved by Maria's story, offered her a part-time cleaning job at a local cafe. Another commuter connected her to a shelter that had space for families. With these small steps, Maria began to rebuild her life. She took the job, saved what little she could, and eventually found a modest room where she and Daniel could sleep safely at night. Months later, Clara visited them there. A tiny, sparsely furnished place, but filled with warmth and hope. Daniel ran across the floor with a giggle, clutching a toy car that another kind stranger had gifted him. Maria brewed tea on a small stove, her smile brighter than Clara had ever seen. "You were the first," Maria said softly as they sat together. "You were the one who stopped. If you hadn't, I don't know where we would be." Clara shook her head, emotion tightening her throat. "I didn't do much. It was just one meal." "But that's the thing," Maria said, her voice firm now. "One act of kindness, it lit everything else. It reminded people to see us. It gave me the strength to believe again." Clara thought back to that first evening, to the food that had fallen on the dirty subway floor, to the shame she had felt at her clumsiness. And yet, even then, Maria had smiled, had thanked her. Kindness, Clara realized, was never about perfection. It was about presence. About showing up, even when flawed, even when small. Over time, Maria's life continued to change. She worked hard, saved diligently, and eventually found a better job. Daniel grew stronger, happier, his laughter filling every corner of their little home. And through it all, Maria never forgot the kindness that had started it: the plate of food, the bottle of water, the compassion of a stranger who chose to stop instead of walk by. Clara, too, carried the lesson with her always. She began to notice more: the elderly man struggling with grocery bags, the student crying quietly on the train, the neighbor who rarely received visitors. She found herself reaching out, offering a hand, a word, a smile. She realized that kindness was not about grand gestures but about countless small moments that together created ripples of change. And in the busy subway station, where life still rushed by in a blur, people remembered. They remembered Maria and Daniel. They remembered Clara's first act. And sometimes, when they saw another person sitting on the cold floor, they stopped. They knelt down. They gave what they could. Because they had learned that in the rush of the world, kindness mattered most of all. The story of Clara and Maria was not written in newspapers or spoken about on television. It did not trend online or make headlines. But it lived on in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, who had been moved by it. It was a story of ordinary people in an ordinary place, proving that kindness is never ordinary. And perhaps that is the truest tale of all, that in the simplest moments, in the food shared, in the hand extended, in the choice to see another's humanity, we find the extraordinary power to change a life. Even if the plate slips, even if the bread falls, the heart that offers it carries the strength to light the darkness. And sometimes, that light is enough to guide someone home.